And the smartest decision I've ever made in my investing career, that included some luck, is I said, let's invest in this thing called the internet.
I'm Prerna Gupta, a tech founder, and in this series, I'll explore how exceptional people succeed by following their hero's journey. Hi,
Sure.
Ron. Welcome to Hero's Journey, and thanks for joining.
Good morning.
So you're known as the Godfather of Silicon Valley, and you've been a hero to hundreds of founders in your career, including me. How did you get into angel investing, and what was your first unicorn?
So I got into angel investing a long time ago, 30 years ago. But before that, I had started and run 3 companies, one of which went public. That was Altos Computer. And one of the board members of Altos Computer was Don Valentine, the founder of Sequoia. And ultimately, we sold Altos Computer after many years after it had gone public. We sold it to the Acer Group in Taiwan. And so I had a chance to have a fresh start. And I had become friends with Don Valentine, who was then, running Sequoia Capital with just one other partner. Sequoia Capital was a tiny firm at the time.
Wow.
And Don said, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, at Altos, I was managing, a couple of thousand people. And I found out I don't like managing people, even though everyone at Altos said I was a good manager. And he said, wow, if you don't like managing people, but you like being around startups, why don't you consider being an angel investor, where you just give founders advice, but you're not managing the founder? And I said, my God, that sounds like a great idea. He said, fine, come sit on some boards with me and watch how I mentor founders. And if you like that, you can start, I'll give you deal flow, and you can start angel investing a little bit of money, a little bit of your own money, and advising founders. I started that 30 years ago and have been completely in love with it. And that's what I still do today, is we invest a little bit of money in companies and we mentor founders and we watch them succeed. If they fail, we help them to fail in an orderly fashion. And one of the best decisions I ever made way back then was I wanted to invest in a segment. I just didn't want to invest in everything. And the smartest decision I've ever made in my investing career, that included some luck, is I said, let's invest in this thing called the internet. It looks brand new. The word internet wasn't even spoken that often, but I said, if I'm right, this is going to be a field that explodes, and I want to be investing in a segment that explodes. What is so interesting is 30 years later, the internet is still exploding. It's the early days. And then we have this new industry called crypto, that is basically the next internet, so to speak, and has all the characteristics of that. So I'm lucky that I get to witness both. So SV Angel, we invest in one company a week, but we stick to our knitting. The vast majority of our investments are internet software, but now we're also dabbling in crypto. Now I want to flip back to your other question. What was our first unicorn? And our first 2 unicorns had something to do with search. The first one was Ask Jeeves, one of the very original search engines.
I remember
and Ask
that.
Jeeves, yes. Ask Jeeves had a very successful IPO years before Google. Ask Jeeves was founded before Google was even thought of. But Ask Jeeves taught SV Angel about the search industry. And when we met Larry and Sergey, and they talked about this simple idea of searching by page rank. For example, if a lot of people go there, there must be something interesting going on there. So when other people do the same search, let's send them to where other people have gravitated. That was the simplest form of the Google algorithm at the time. Funny enough, called backrub was the nickname of it. So our first two big unicorns were in the search space. Then of course we had PayPal in the very early days as well. But as you know, these unicorns come few and far between. But we've been very fortunate.
Well, you've been very, very successful. You clearly have a special talent in identifying these winners. And really, as a seed investor, your job is exactly that. It's to identify future heroes, the visionary founders of tomorrow, before anyone else has figured out that, that their startup will be successful, and before anyone really believes in them. How can you tell when a founder is special?
Well, we can tell when a founder is special when we meet people like you. Um, when we meet a founder, well, it's all about the people. Number one, it's all about the people. We invest in the people first. The idea is second, and it's second way down the line. We really look at the human being, and we look to see if the founder, if they're solving a practical problem, if they're really determined and passionate about their idea. And I know those are like catchphrases, but when you're talking to a founder, you can see the passion. You can see the determination. Then the next thing I ask is okay, I like the idea. They're solving a practical need. But that's not as important as the human being. But then I look at, hey, can this founder communicate well? Can they evangelize the idea well enough? Why do I ask that question? Because that founder, the next big thing after they do the prototype and they get traction, they have to hire more engineers. So I'm always thinking, will this founder be able to, are they outgoing just enough? Because a lot of technical founders aren't outgoing, but are they outgoing enough that they can go recruit engineers and get engineers to leave their cushy job that they're probably at and move to a tiny startup? So I look for that too, that they're going to have enough chutzpah to attract people out of their company, out of their existing company. And that's enthusiasm. That's being able to communicate how great their company is, being able to communicate the vision of where we're going. And with that founder will be able to recruit lots of engineers. And that's the next big step. And we also look for nice people. Nice people win. And you have all those traits.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm humbled for you to say that about me, and I know that you have invested in very, very brilliant and very successful founders, and it's an honor to be included in that group.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
remember,
also
for every founder we invest in, we have looked at another 10 or 20, because we have a whole system for picking the founders that we have a phone call with, and then the founders we have a meeting with. In the last 2 years, it's been a Zoom meeting, which is not the same.
Yeah.
Nothing like face to face and watching the real body language. But keep in mind, for every founder we invest in, we've looked at 10 or 20 others.
Yeah. Well, you've clearly gotten it down to science, and it's. I mean, if you look at your portfolio, it's truly mind blowing. I mean, you've invested in over 700 startups, and had an incredible number of wins. You're one of the most successful investors of all time. But as you mentioned, startup investing is a game of outliers, which means most of your investments will fail. How do you think about founders who fail? What's your opinion about founders who fail? And do you ever bet on them again?
SV Angel for sure um, uh, bets on founders that fail. So it depends on how they fail
Mhm.
and how they behave during the failure. But keep in mind, a majority of the founders do fail. So what we're talking about right now is the majority case.
Yeah.
60% of all companies fail. But we admire any founder who has the courage to start a company. Starting a company is the gutsiest thing you'll ever do. I did it. I did it myself with Altos Computer. It is hard. You know, people trivialize founders. No one except the founders know how much work it is. It is harder work than any other career. So we respect founders. So if they're failing, we and sometimes the outsider will see it first. So if they're failing, sometimes we'll tap the founder on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, but do you realize things aren't going well?" And if the founder quickly admits, "Hey, you're right, things aren't going well. Can you help me? Should I morph the company into some other space?" And many companies do that, and they morph into a more successful space, which is just awesome to see. But some founders, it's just not going to work. And then we advise them on what is the fair thing to do for your team. And the fair thing to do for the team is what we call an orderly shutdown. You know, don't walk in one day and say, "We're out of money. I can't even pay you 2 weeks." That's a founder we probably won't invest in again. But if a founder admits it's not going well, starts to think about their team first, and I'm going to make this orderly for the team. Everybody's getting 2 weeks pay. We're going to help everyone get placed. That's a founder who's a great human being. We want to invest in that founder again. Remember Napster. Napster failed. Napster went out of business. Sean Parker and Sean Fanning went on to start other companies. Sean Parker became the president of Facebook. So failed founders are not failed founders. Failed founders are founders in transition. And we love to support those founders.
That's very inspiring. And I think it speaks so much to who you are as a person and why you've been so important in the lives of so many founders. And one thing that you mentioned a few times is you like to invest in founders who behave ethically, who are good people, who are nice. You know, I guess tell me a little bit more about that, because in a lot of ways, in business, obviously business is cutthroat, and you have to be a little bit cutthroat sometimes to succeed. But there, as a founder, you're making a decision every day to be ethical or to cross the line. Why do you believe that it's important to be ethical and be a good person? And why do you think the good people can still win in a world that's full of people in business who are crossing the line?
Yeah. Well, I believe in karma, and I believe in what goes around comes around. And I believe that you don't have to be nasty cutthroat to win. In business, you have to be aggressive, you have to be proactive, you have to state your case. If one of your competitors is telling a bold-faced lie, you have to call that out. That's part of being proactive and aggressive. But you don't have to be cutthroat to the point where you sacrifice any ethics or morals. Because remember, if you do that, your team is going to lose respect for you. Team members are looking for a founder who is a leader, who is aggressive, who wants to conquer the space and conquer the world, but they want to do it with aggressive, legitimate business practices. Because when you do that, your company gains respect, and you'll succeed even faster. I mean, look at Airbnb and Twitter and Square, and these are companies that are led by founders who have a strong moral, ethical compass, and look how successful they are, and they deserve that success.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, on that topic, there's been, we're obviously both in the tech industry, and I think we both know so many people who are the leaders of these companies that are truly, truly good people. But in the press and in the media, there has been such a strong anti-tech sentiment that has developed over the past few years. And, I understand it to some level, but it also puzzles me. If you think about any major industry that's come up in our society, whether it's finance, oil and energy, food and agriculture, consumer goods, every industry you name has had both positive and negative impacts. And that's natural when a big industry comes up and disrupts all of our lives. It's also natural and important, I think, for us to have an open conversation about the negative externalities and figure out what to do about it as a society. But why do you think there has been such a disproportionately strong negative reaction to tech and this anti-tech sentiment developing? And do you think it's warranted?
Well, I agree with you. The anti-tech sentiment has been brewing, I would say, pretty strong for about 3 years now. And I think the heart of it, whether we like it or not, it comes down to one word: is the core cause of this. And we have not gotten our arms around it yet. And the M word is misinformation. The tech companies at large have been dealing with the issue of misinformation for about 3 years now. And I don't believe we have our arms around it. I think all the CEOs agree we don't have our arms around it, but we have not figured out a solution yet. We're right now, I think, unfortunately, at the height of the finger pointing stage of recognizing this problem, of the people in Washington, D.C. saying, you are awful, please figure out misinformation. And then the tech companies saying, we're trying to figure out misinformation. And Washington, D.C. saying, you're not figuring it out fast enough. And I think in the end, what is going to happen is Washington, D.C. and the tech industry are going to have to come together. They're going to have to leave the finger pointing stage. They're going to have to come together in a really constructive way and have the misinformation version of the Paris peace talks, where everyone comes to the meeting with all of their biases put to the side and say, we're going to just sit down and we're going to solve this now. It's going to take the government and the tech industry cooperating together. It is going to take changes to Section 230. Section 230 to me is the symbol. If we can get the tech companies and Washington, D.C. to sit down and say, we're really going to solve this, which means we're all going to agree that Section 230 is going to change, and we're going to try and change it so that we prevent misinformation. In the meantime, lots of band-aids are happening while all the finger pointing is going on. I think vaccine misinformation is an area where the tech companies can kind of say, okay, this is kind of a newish issue. Let's use that for some best practices.
Mhm.
And because lives are at stake, let's practice, so to speak, and solve the vaccine misinformation. Let's use that as the Trojan horse to get to a bigger negotiation.
Yeah. Very well said, and I think that's a great overview, and I think you're exactly right. And it's complicated because it's not, like you said, it requires both sides coming together and being willing to have, an open conversation that's non-confrontational. But I believe we'll get there, and I think, as you said, it's ultimately the intentions are in the right place, and that's where it starts.
Yeah. But if you look at the past Senate and House hearings where they've brought in the CEOs, all you see is emotion.
Yeah.
We 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 got to get out of the emotion phase. I guess it's like this, the 4 stages of grieving or something. There must be 4 stages of getting one of the biggest problems facing humanity, getting our arms around that. And we're still in the emotion phase. I pray we get out of that really soon. It's something that I'm spending my private time on. I do spend a lot of my private time on talking to people in Washington, D.C., and then talking to people in the tech industry and trying to move us to the stage of constructive discussion. And if I can be a baby Henry Kissinger, I'm willing and want to do that for this industry. We have too much at stake. Look at what the tech industry has accomplished for the world: the creation of jobs, the creation of solutions. Uh, you know, Airbnb and Uber and Instacart, they employ thousands of people, but then they allow people who want to be part-time workers who are just trying to make ends meet, they allow them to put food on the table. The amazing things the tech industry has done for the world are incalculable, but we have warts, and the biggest one is misinformation. Hey, if we can invent all these solutions, we can eventually sit down and solve this issue.
Yeah.
And I'm an optimist. I feel like we're getting close. I think we have to get through all this infrastructure stuff. We have to get voting rights passed. We have to get the freedom, the Freedom to Vote Act. It used to be S1 and HR1. That is very important for our democracy. We need to get some basics done this year. And then I'm hoping everyone kind of says, oh, we can take a deep breath. Let's go back and really solve for misinformation.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue. You speak very knowledgeably about, all these issues in government, and that's because you've spent so much of your personal time over the past several years on activism. Why do you choose to use your platform and your time to try and make the world a better place?
I think we have a responsibility as individuals and as companies. This is why I evangelize for the Pledge 1%, for every company to sign Pledge 1%, where you give 1% of your equity, 1% of your employees' volunteer time. That's the most valuable, and 1% of your product if it's applicable. That tech leaders plant a stake in the ground, that they stand for giving back in their community. So years ago, I got super active in San Francisco, and solving the techlash that occurred in San Francisco. And when Donald Trump got elected, I thought that he was not great for our country. So I moved my personal time to that issue, and that issue is now solved. But I think it's very important for founders to be civically engaged. I'm urging every founder to call their senators and congressmen and ask for the passage of the Freedom to Vote Act. That's a really important piece of legislation. All the civil rights leaders across our country are urging for passage of this. We're at a historical moment where we need to guarantee future generations the right to vote. So there are fundamental pieces of legislation that are really important that I do not think are political. These are bipartisan, humanitarian, and democracy preservation issues. The right to vote is a democracy preservation issue. Immigration reform is a humanitarian issue. These 700,000 DACA kids who were born here, they have a right to stay here and be employed here. And people like Lorraine Powell Jobs and the Emerson Collective and Forward.us, we're spending a lot of time right now making sure that the DACA kids are protected in these bills that are being considered right now. We're at a crucial point where I think every tech founder has to get involved in DACA and voting rights.
Yeah. Well, the work that you've been doing is amazing. It's much needed, and I think it's also really appreciated by the founders that you kind of urge us to be involved. It's hard sometimes as a founder because you're, in it with your own startup and kind of heads down. But I always appreciate when you kind of nudge me, because it reminds me how important it is to take time to be civically engaged, because so much of our success is because of this great democracy that we've lived in. And as an immigrant, for me especially, it's been life-changing to be able to grow up in this country and run a business in this country. And it's like you said, we're fighting for the preservation of our democracy, and it's important for all of us to be involved in that.
Starting a company is the hardest thing on earth, but if a founder can take a sliver of their time, their leverage in Washington, D.C., because the legislators are fascinated with founders. So when a founder speaks out, the legislators listen. So founders have a very loud megaphone in Washington, D.C., and I know how busy they are, but if they spend just a little time using their megaphone on the outside, they can have a huge return on their time for civic engagement. Another aspect that I think is really important is racial equity. And after George Floyd, I think everyone in this country had an awakening. But waking yourself up is fine, but we have to do something. And what I'm doing, and hoping others do the same thing, is I've invested in a company called Slauson & Co. It's a venture capital fund led by two amazing general partners of color, and they are going to go out and invest in founders of color. And what we need is a Larry Page of color, a Mark Zuckerberg of color, a Jack Dorsey of color. That can't happen unless we have venture capital funds that invest in founders of color that create the next Jack Dorsey of color. And Slauson & Co. is doing that. There's many other general partner of color venture funds out there. This is going to take 10 years to happen, but we have to start now. And the more venture capital funds led by founders of color, led by general partners of color, investing in founders of color, that is the systemic solution to racial equity. And that is something else that I am evangelizing. I mentor the Slauson & Co. general partners for hours a week. We are going to find, the Larry Page and the Jack Dorsey of color We're going to build $1 trillion company, and off we go. We have changed the ecosystem.
That's so important. It's very well said. Thank you for closing with that. Thank you for all your wisdom and your service to the country, to Silicon Valley, and to founders. It's such an honor to be a part of your network and to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, and we're honored to be investors in Hooked, which is another one of the great companies.